It's April 2012, 1 a.m. The plane had just hit the runway, and there I was in Hamburg airport from a 12-hour-long flight from Kenya. 14 hours earlier, my family and some of my village people had traveled hundreds of kilometers to see me off at the airport in Nairobi. I remember looking outside the airplane window, and I'll never forget this feeling. It was the feeling of anxiousness mixed with uncertainty and crippling fear running through my skin. I sat there thinking if I had really made the right choice to travel to a country that I did not know anyone, right? Barely spoke the language, to work as a nanny or otherwise au pair. As I made my way towards the exit gates, I was warmly received by my then au pair family. And as we headed to their home, the only thoughts at the back of my head were, I hope this decision is worth it. So, why Germany, right? That's the first question people usually ask me. It's very simple. I learned German in high school, and it only made sense to travel to this country that I'd learned so many amazing things about. For instance, the Four Seasons weather, the great castles, and what was so fascinating for me on top was the Lorelei fairy tale. I really wanted to see if the place actually existed in real life. My goal was to use the au pair program to come and improve my German, get to know the culture, and study afterwards. During the program, I quickly realized that there was no amount of history or geography lessons that would have prepared me for the culture shock. I'm talking about the mindset, right? The food, especially sauerkraut. The people, everything was just so different. At some point, I even really doubted my decision to come here in the first place. Now, despite all my uncertainties, though, one thing for sure was very clear, that my trip to Germany was a massive breakthrough for me and my family because it symbolized hope and inspiration. It meant access to better opportunities, and that one day I will be able to support my family financially and give back to my community. 1 year fast forward in Germany, the au pair program had ended, and my German was significantly getting better. I'd applied to various universities, and I got admitted to Frankfurt University of Applied Sciences, where I was to study international business management. Now, this was yet another massive breakthrough, and it seemed like all the efforts that my family had put in to send me abroad were starting to pay off. My goal in university was to graduate and work at a big company. In the 5th semester of the course, we had something called internship semester, which meant in order for me to graduate even in the first place, I needed to have successfully gained work experience at a given company. And so I set out to apply for my first ever real corporate job in Germany. The job application process turned out to be one of the hardest things I've had to endure in my life. For the first time, I was confronted with what it is not only to be a woman, okay, but a young black woman pursuing corporate career in Germany. What I found out was eye-opening and challenged every existing belief I had of what it takes to become a top candidate. And it was out of that journey that I made 3 big discoveries that I want to share with you today. The first discovery that I made was that people hire people they are familiar with. And I know it might sound unfair, but studies have actually shown that where there is a human element in any decision-making process, the outcome is never entirely based on merits. Now, this experience takes me back to a conversation between some German students, one of them saying that they had landed an internship at Germany's largest airline. Now, mind you, up until hearing that conversation, the only type of jobs that I'd been doing were house cleaning jobs, babysitting, and so you can imagine the shock on my face when I heard that, because I never imagined as a student you could work at such a big company. It was a wake-up call, and out of fear of missing out, of probably having fallen behind, I started sending applications to different companies in Germany. 80 applications in, right? And 80 rejections later, it was crystal clear that I stood no chance, and I had to change the strategy. I had observed that the German students who were working in these big corporations all had one thing in common. They all had connections in those specific companies, and they all had landed their jobs via referrals. And so it was in that instance that it occurred to me that connections was definitely something that I did not have, and it could be the missing puzzle to solving my job search problems. And so I set out to apply to this event management agency, and we made a deal that I'm only going to do catering services at big company events. My goal was to use that informal setup to make good impression and to build connections with the employees of my target companies who hopefully would refer me if they liked my coffee services. I would then use that chance to also give them my CV, and they would also give me their business cards in return. And guess what? That is how I landed my first ever internship at an investment bank. Now, this experience taught me that your career success is highly attributed to the kind of professional connections that you keep. And knowing how important that is, I founded the Career Lounge, which has become the fastest growing mentoring platform for international students and graduates in Germany, where we help them successfully transition from university into the workplace by matching them with mentors from their target industries, with some of them even landing jobs at their dream companies. Thank you. The second discovery that I made was that grades do not necessarily determine how somebody will perform on the job. You see, one common misconception is that perfect grades are relevant in order to become successful later on in life. But studies have shown that, in fact, personality predicts success way more accurately than perfect grades. Before I landed my job at this investment bank, a lot of companies had rejected me on the basis of my imperfect grades. And honestly, my grades were really no good. But I had assumed that I would compensate for it with other great qualities and skills that I had. For instance, I could speak 4 different languages fluently, including German. I had prior international industry-relevant work experience from back in Kenya. And thirdly, and most importantly, was obviously my very motivated attitude and readiness to learn. But surprisingly, though, to all the companies that I had applied to, none of that mattered. And so it took one person, namely my internship manager, seeing past my imperfect grades and giving me a chance based on how I performed during the interview, that changed my career trajectory to this day. And guess what? My performance was just as good as that of the other interns who looked perfect on paper. This experience led me to conclude that if companies really want to win over good quality candidates, they need to adopt a more open-minded approach, which includes doing away with the resume bias, because a resume bias basically assumes you automatically know how somebody will perform on the job solely based on the facts presented to you on this single piece of paper, while ignoring all other relevant qualities that are not easily demonstrated on paper. For instance, motivation, grit, readiness to learn, or even the ability to bounce back from setbacks. On the other hand, this will require candidates taking that initial risk and applying for jobs that they think they might be underqualified, and being okay looking imperfect on paper, because in essence, the perfect candidate does not and will never exist. This brings me to my third and last discovery. By show of hands, how many of you feel that they are 100% authentic version of themselves at work? Oh, okay. That's less than I expected, though. The discovery that I made was that authenticity is a key ingredient in achieving your goals, and it starts with you choosing to tell your story. This takes me back to the days when I was applying for my first full-time job at the same investment bank that I'd done my internship. I'd gone through a rigorous selection process for their trainee program, and there I was in the assessment center full of other candidates who had MBAs, attended some of the top elite schools, and on paper really looked way more qualified than me. In fact, I was the only person in the room that day who had a bachelor's degree. Out of the small talk, it became very clear that the only differentiating factor between me and the other 15 candidates was obviously the gender, of course, and weirdly something that I'd been neglecting for a very long time, and that was my story. And it was in that instance that I decided that I will face my biggest fear and tell my true story for the first time in a job interview. I knew that the only way that I would really build that initial connection with the hiring managers was not only how well I answer the interview questions, but also telling them what it actually took me to sit on the same table with everybody else who was present in that room that day. Later on after the interview, one of the hiring managers gave me the feedback that my story motivated them, and it showed my determination to achieving my goals. And guess what? I was one of the 3 candidates who was second for the position that day. I used the same concept to transition to one of the largest tech consulting firms, where I currently work as a consultant and advise some of Europe's largest banks in driving digitalization and innovation forward. This experience taught me that to be authentic means to know who you are and to unapologetically show up as that person in all aspects of your life. It requires being clear of what you want to stand for and represent. Now, as I look back on my journey today, honestly, I am very grateful for all the challenges that I went through, because I have learned to have grit and resilience even in times of uncertainty. I've also learned that sometimes it takes that one person believing in you to succeed that can sometimes change your entire life for the better. And so I challenge each and every one of you here today to do something out of your comfort zone, right? If you are a hiring manager, maybe give that imperfect candidate a chance. And if you are a candidate, apply for the job positions that you think you might be underqualified, or even start that business you always wanted to do, or even apply for your first TED Talk like me. Because the people who succeed, those who truly live the lives that they want, are those who can get out of their comfort zone, face their fears head on, and stand strong against them. They are strong because they know that without fear, there is no courage. And without courage, there is no success. Thank you very much. Thank you.